Welcome to SmallTalk by Sfarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. In this episode of SmallTalk, I'm going to be joined by Dr. Eleff, who's president of Gratz College, and we'll be discussing his book, Dyed in Crimson, Football, Faith, and Remaking Harvard's America, published by the University of Illinois Press. And the reason for this podcast, I will say, was talking to Zev, I think when this book came out in 2023, so I got a copy of the book. We never got around to doing a podcast on it. And we were talking earlier this week. We were recording this literally a few days before the Super Bowl. And we were supposed to record anyways a different episode. And we were talking, I said, Super Bowl, football, people talking about football, Jewish, there's a Jewish connection to football here. Maybe we do something, I'm a big Steelers fan, Zev's a big Ravens fan. So we should talk a little bit something football related, Jewish related. So we decided to talk about quick small talk on this. So Zev, why did you write this book?
Well, first of all, this blast Space Hill and made Shammai out of the water. Yeah, sure, they married their daughters to one another, but that a Ravens fan and a Steelers fan can actually speak civilly about football. We still have 15, 20 minutes to go. That's a level of achdus that is unprecedented. Why did I write the book? I'm a huge sports fan, and it was in the middle of COVID, and in order to keep sane, I needed a project. But actually, the reason precedes that is that my son, so this was about 11 years ago, my son, who is turning 11 in 2 weeks, Jack, my grandma and Zadie gave us this antiquated thing, a gift certificate to Barnes & Noble. And we were driving along Route 4, so saying Shema as I got onto the on-ramp. So what else are you supposed to do? And we drive to Barnes & Noble. And Melissa, my wife, we walk in with Maytal, 3 years old, and little baby Jack. And we enter the store. And right before the escalator, of course, is the table with the new releases. And I love my wife very, very much. She looks at me dead in the eye and looks at these books, says, "How come you can't write a book like this?" So I had referred to the protagonist, Arnold Horween, who was really Hank Greenberg and Sandy Koufax before there was a Hank Greenberg and Sandy Koufax. I referred to him in an article about this thing that never came into fruition called Menorah University in the 1920s. And the founder, the would-be founder, Louis Newman, in order to galvanize American Jewry to support the establishment of Menorah University at a time in which there were terrible quotas and anti-Semitism preventing Jews from entering into colleges and universities. Let's start Menorah University. He offered in the pages of the Jewish Press and then in a little booklet that we need to create a new climate, because, of course, we have instances such as when Arnold Horowitz needs to change his nom de ghetto from Horowitz to Horween in order to avoid the censors, at Harvard, the admissions committee, and become an all-American fullback for the Harvard Crimson. And I took that at face value and actually quoted it in an article I wrote in Modern Judaism. I sort of put it, as historians, my teacher Jonathan Sarna always likes to say, is that some articles, some ideas, some books, they're pushka projects. You deposit materials over time. During COVID, I had already collected enough about Horween, learned actually that he did not change. He was born Arnold Horween in 1898. I knew that I had a really interesting story about the dynamics of religious life and religious identity. And at the time, nobody had ever written about anti-Semitism at Harvard. It was a newfangled thing. I didn't invent it. And I'm not
little did they know what was to come, huh?
Yeah, so that's sort of the background. And then when we were in Boston, I had access to the Harvard archives, moved to Chicago where I had a position at the Hebrew Theological College, Skokie Yeshiva. And during COVID, I really had the opportunity to think deeply about a fun book. And to me, it was a very fun book. Every book is fun. This was especially fun.
It's great that he was a fullback. Like, what's a fullback in today's NFL, in today's football world, right? How many 10 teams have the Ravens still have a fullback?
He never lost. He never lost in his varsity. First of all, when Woodrow Wilson suspended collegiate football, there was no such thing as the NFL when he started. That was founded in 1920, 1921. He was the captain of the JV team in his freshman year. His second year was World War I, and so he played for a Naval Reserve team and never lost. Was a bruising running back. Even though Harvard had a great running back named Eddie Casey, Arnie Horween started, as well did his brother. Other than 2 ties against Princeton, who they claimed played dirty, he never lost in 2 years at varsity, and actually won the Rose Bowl New Year's Day, 1920.
And he plays for Harvard. He coaches at Harvard. He plays in the NFL.
When Harvard was part of the Big Three. Right, nowadays, you wouldn't associate Harvard with the likes of Alabama or Notre Dame. But before there was Newt Rockne, there was Indiana. Now, for a moment, we'll see what the portal does. At the time, Yale, Harvard, and Princeton, and Harvard with Percy Houghton in the 1910s. Although he leaves, does Houghton. Arnold Horween is king of American football in 1920, and very well known as a Jew.
And that's where I wanted to go next. Like, listeners probably saying, well, okay, this is Farm Chat. Like, we can talk football for a while, but the question is, like, his Jewishness, right? This is not a person that was ever religious in any sense of the word. So how does his Jewishness play a role? And as you researched that and wrote about this throughout his life and his career at Harvard and the NFL.
Right. So just a little bit of data about him. He wins the Rose Bowl. They go undefeated again in 1921. He leaves, goes to Chicago, where his father owns a very important leather company. Actually, if you own a Wilson baseball mitt, you actually own Horween leather. And he eventually plays for the Chicago Cardinals and coaches them to a contested championship in 1925. And in 1926, he's not a Boston Brahmin, and that's a problem for many. He comes back to Harvard and he coaches them from 1926 to 1930 back to respectability. They fell on hard times for a little bit amid terrible anti-Semitism. You're absolutely right that Arnold and Ralph, his older brother Ralph, who actually argued a case or two before the Supreme Court and was a very important lawyer in his own right. Arnie isn't demonstratively Jewish. When the press asked him, so do you have any Jewish players on your team this year? He said, I don't know. Why don't you ask them? I'd argue that that's less important than American Jews rallying around Arnold Horween in the 1920s. He was a household name. There are, in the book, I have evidence of sermons, of drushes delivered without any explanation. To these listeners, what the heck is an Arnold Horween? They have to buy the book. But at the time, Arnold Horween and Benny Leonard were two of the most well-known Jews in the United States. Certainly most well-known Jewish athletes. Benny Leonard, of course, the boxer. What's great in the end of the book is in the announcements, in the pages that announce Horween's retirement from Harvard, they also announce that this guy, Hank Greenberg, has been promoted in the Piedmont League up to the majors for the Detroit Tigers. He would go down again, but still. He's not well known anymore, I think, because of the state of Harvard football. At the time, you don't have television, right? We don't have any video, even real audio, radio of Arnie Horween playing football. It's, if you think about how on the Mount Rushmore, so to speak, Hank Greenberg, of course, trying to break Babe Ruth's home run record and playing in the golden age of baseball, 1930s, 1940s. And, of course, in Odoma, Sandy Koufax in the age of television and Hollywood, and what he would do with so many Cy Youngs and World Series MVPs. But then, of course, Koufax, to answer your question, neither Koufax nor Hank Greenberg were terribly Jewish in their own right. In fact, it's kind of heresy. But the scholarship is actually, you don't even need me. I was going to write an article about it, but somebody already done it. David Kaufman did in a book called Jew Hooing in the 60s, is that in 1965, nobody really gave it much notice that Koufax decided not to pitch Game 1 of the World Series. meaning it wasn't a very Jewish moment until the late 1970s and 1980s. Some listeners will say, that's not true. I was alive. Okay. So some people paid notice. There's also deceptive retrospect. But the fact remains that when Koufax decides not to pitch on Yom Kippur in 1965, there are ample reasons why nobody gave a darn. They were because Don Drysdale was also a Hall of Fame pitcher, not Koufax. Number two, as long as Koufax could pitch in game two, he would be able to pitch 3 times in the series, and luckily he did, because he loses game 2 and he wins the subsequent 2 by shutouts, and he wins World Series MVP. It also rained. It didn't rain. It was supposed to rain. The game was supposed to be rained out. So he thought he was going to play, and then finally, now fourth reason, Drysdale hadn't pitched in a while, and so getting him to be less chilled and pitch sooner was advantageous for the Dodgers. But whatever the case is, that moment, Yom Kippur 1965, less pivotal for the American Jewish public than Arnold Horween being named football coach for the Harvard Crimson in 1926, and for American Jews in every newspaper and every sermon at that moment saying, look at this, the walls of anti-Semitism are crashing down. One of ours is now atop the highest echelon of Boston higher culture.
And as you quote in the book, Henry Pennypacker to Fred Moore, you have a quote from the Harvard University Archives, I am really doubtful if we could expediently invite any member of the Hebrew race to become a head coach, no matter how skillful he might be. There is a settled feeling, apparently very widespread, that we must do something at once to check certain growing influence, and that Horween's appointment in the present ticklish situation would be perilous. So you can see there were those that were not happy about it.
I collected a lot of good anti-Semitism for this book. In a previous note he wrote to Moore, Pennypacker claims it's okay, he's only half Jewish. Sounds like an Adam Sandler song. His mother, Rose Horween, being of Greek nobility, it's not true. She was a Jewish Ukrainian, just like Isidore Horween, her husband. So he was set correctly, and all of a sudden he wrote back saying, I don't think so. In that moment, Horween's success as a football player and as a coach, right? The brawn and the brains, melding those stereotypes together was really, really important. And so it's absolutely the case that Arnold Horween was not a very Jewishly Jewish person. But the American Jewish community, for them, it was a pivotal moment. A since forgotten moment. Hopefully I did something to reverse that. But if you had to ask me, for the American Jews, in contemporaneous awareness, what set them off more? Arnold Horween being elected, being hired as head coach of the Harvard Football Crimson in April 1926, or, and it sounds crazy, or the American Jewish community's notice of Koufax, other than a Chabad rabbi who laid tefillin on him in Minnesota at the time. So compare Horween in that moment to Koufax in 65, there's no question that American Jews paid much closer attention to Horween over Koufax. I'm not at all suggesting that we sort of resculpt Mount Rushmore. Koufax looms the largest. But in terms of in its moment, Horween was more pivotal than Koufax.
Let's talk about the NFL as well. So he plays in the NFL. He plays for the Chicago Cardinals, who become later the Arizona Cardinals, so the precursor to the Arizona Cardinals. And he plays.
He's quarterback. He's not fallback anymore. He's quarterback.
He's quarterback. He plays in 11 games. He scores 4 touchdowns. He actually kicks some extra points. That happened in the olden days. But not only he plays in the NFL, successful in the NFL, but he played under the name McMahon.
So he played under an Irish pseudonym. Why?
Yes, he can't be Jewish in the NFL either.
Because Rose, not of Greek nobility, his mom, said, this thing, see, in football, was a seedy thing. Who was available to play on Sundays, on God's day? Who was somebody who could get laid up, potentially, and risk missing work for a week or two if they got hurt? It was a poor immigrant worker. Wealthier people, middle-class people could not take a risk by playing in the football. There was no insurance in those days. So in many, and also is that you got blacklisted by the colleges. This idea of being paid to play. Now everybody's paid, but at the time certainly nobody was. And so many coaches, and there was a lot of questions about his fitness to be a coach for the Harvard Crimson in a few years from now. But Rose Horween wanted no part in her sons playing in this seedy thing called the National Professional Football League. They dropped the P eventually. And so they went under a different name. They went under A. McMahon and B. Not very clever. A. McMahon and B. McMahon. Now, the secret was out. It was an open secret that these were the Horween brothers. But absolutely, before there was Boomer Esiason or Kyler Murray or Kurt Warner or Jake Plummer, how many Cardinal quarterbacks can I possibly name? There was Arnold Horween.
A lot of bad ones.
Well, Kurt Warner went to the Super Bowl. Oh, yeah, you know that. Yeah,
he lost.
You remember that one. Darn it.
And he lost in 2009, right? But the Cardinals, it's also interesting to think that the Cardinals have this long history, but they have this Jewish player who was there until 1926, and I think was it 1924 or 26? He goes back to Harvard, and he coaches Harvard for a couple of years. So I'm curious, his end of his NFL career and the end of his Harvard career, so the end of both careers, do either end come about because of his Jewishness?
No. His father summons him. He says, Isidore Horween says, I'm running this important shop, his leather company. I've done pretty well. Your older brother, it was just the two brothers. Ralph is determined to keep this legal career. I need you to run it. And so he does. And he would always work. They would leave for the football season. But it's no untoward reason that he leaves the coaching ranks. In fact, what's interesting, he really does break new ground because even less likely perhaps than a Jew becoming the coach at Harvard is a Catholic. And so it's an amazing thing that Eddie Casey, his running mate, during his playing days and his assistant coach, he takes over as head coach of the Harvard Crimson directly afterwards. So, and think about sort of pluralism and religious tolerance. Horween and Bill Bingham, who's another part of this story, who is the athletic director, they really do transform Harvard for a moment, and they create an era of openness. At least I like to imagine so.
You mentioned this. Arnold Horween dies in 1985. His brother Ralph dies 12 years later in 1997, and he's over 100. And the NFL bills him.
The oldest living football player at the time. I was hoping I could find a football card of one of the two. We're collectors here, but no such luck.
Fascinating. So, what would you say the takeaway in Arnold Horween's legacy is, and the takeaway for listeners is here?
I think the takeaway for Arnold Horween is the. I still like to believe in American exceptionalism and American Jewish exceptionalism. I think that in a very fraught political climate, we don't like to talk about these things. But the idea that a first-generation American can make something of himself, that a Jewish kid from Chicago, Middle West, Jewish, son of Ukrainian immigrants, can become an All-American running back, halfback, and then coach the Harvard Crimson, teaches us about this is a Medina Shel Chesed. This is a place in which the contours of possibilities are really endless.
All right, well, thank you, Zev, for joining me to discuss a football-related topic. I'll link to the book. What'd you say?
Go Seahawks.
Yes, absolutely. I second that. And thank you for joining me. And not Ravens, even though we were able to have a cordial conversation. Yes, very civil conversation here on the podcast. I'll link to the book in the show notes for those interested. They can purchase it. And thank you, Zev, once again.